Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the LATAM Stocks Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Flood. Today I'm speaking with Federico Orsi. Federico is the founder of Impactio Finance, which is a finance and economics advisory firm. They advise firms, startups, investment funds on their investments in Argentina. And it's a very interesting time to be an investor or an analyst looking at Argentina. So there's a ton of topics we can talk about, and I want to get right into it, Federico. So, hi, Federico. How are you?
Patrick, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here today talking about my country.
No, thank you so much for accepting the invitation and coming on. Because, like I mentioned, it really is a fascinating time to be studying and following Argentina. So, before we get into it, why don't you tell everyone a little bit about your background? Where are you from? Where'd you go to school? What career path led you to founding Impacto Finance?
Sure. Well, I am from Rosario, Argentina. I did my bachelor in business administration back in 2010. And then I started working professionally on the finance field. I worked in Deloitte for a couple of years in the corporate finance area. And then I decided to start on my own path, my own company. Then I went to the UK. I did my master's in corporate finance there. And then I founded Impactio Finance, which is my boutique firm that we provide services related to investment banking, valuation, M&As in Argentina and in throughout the region. So yeah, roughly 15 years of experience working in this field. And I really love my country. I love Argentina. I really am passionate about the goods we have. And finally, I think this is the time that the country is starting to take off, right? So it's a good moment to discuss. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to ask you a little more later on about, the specific work you do with companies and valuations and investments in Argentina. But first, I think maybe we should set the stage for listeners that aren't following Argentina as closely or they just see headlines. So can you give me, from your perspective, what is going on in Argentina right now economically? What are the most important points that listeners should understand?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think Argentina, well, as you also always mention in your podcast, Latin America is a fascinating area, right? Sometimes it's very undercovered, and many times countries such as Argentina is not appearing on the news and on the investment environment. Since last year, there was a presidential election in December. There was a new president called Javier Milei. He's like a neoliberalist. He came to the presidency with lots of shocking announcements and things that he wanted to cut off the state, sell public companies, dollarize the economy, eliminate the central banks, and lots of shocking measures that gathered attention from lots of media, right? For example, in the US, he met with Trump, he went to Davos. All the financial environment started talking about Argentina. But for those of you that maybe are not very aware of the country, Argentina is a very big economy, let's say, in terms of GDP. It's the third biggest economy of Latin America. The first one, of course, is Brazil, and then followed by Mexico, and then we have Argentina. And Argentina is very big, very large in terms of geography. It's one of the most important producers of agricultural products. For example, soybean. Soybean is the first producer and exporter in the world of soybean oil, flour, same with sunflower. Also, we have a very important mining industry. We have lithium. We have in the south, we have Vaca Muerta, which you might have heard about it. That is one of the biggest shale oil and gas reserves in the world that we are starting to develop. So there's a huge opportunity there. And we're a good country. Of course, we have our flowbacks. We have high inflation. We have instability, which are the things that we might be covering today.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think you mentioned the inflation, and I think that's probably what international listeners find most shocking, right? Because they really can't imagine a devaluation the way the peso devalued because of the inflation and daily price increases. So can you maybe set the stage? Like, when did that start? Why did it happen? And where is it now?
It's a great question, because that's something that it's super difficult to understand from the views of someone who is not from Argentina, right? I work with companies and people from all around the world. I studied abroad, I travel as well, and I speak with American people, European people, and they cannot feel what we feel in Argentina. For example, last December, inflation rate was 25% in the month. So imagine, it changed 25% up the prices of most of the goods just in 1 month. The US, for example, is now trying to tame inflation. They are trying to reach a goal of 2% per year. That's the goal of the Fed. We have 10 times more in 1 month. So it generally distorts prices a lot. People don't know what to do with their pesos. They don't know where to invest. They buy dollars. So it generates lots of chaos in the country. But if we want to talk about the roots of inflation in Argentina, they are intricate and they are closely linked to political history, economic policies, and the social dynamics, right? I would say that inflation started around mid of the 20th century when governments started to spend more than what the money, that the income that they receive. And inflation is a consequence of financing fiscal deficits. That's the main problem of the country. We are all investors, and you don't have to be a genius to know that if you spend more than your salary, you will be in problems, right? With our own money. Imagine a country the same. Argentina, I believe that I saw some stats that over the past 62 years, only 6 years, they had fiscal surpluses. So roughly 56 years of deficits. That's really crazy. So the government printed money to finance all the deficits, to all the people happy, and that generated a ball that started growing, and now it was about to explode.
Yeah. So you mentioned it was about to explode, but I think there's reason for optimism, right? The reason there's so many headlines around Argentina, people are starting to get excited because Argentina, I think it was last week, announced their first surplus in 16 years, maybe. I think it was 2008 or 2009. So what has changed? What did Milei do in his first 3 months to have a surplus for the first time in 16 years?
No, as you mentioned, this is really great news that this week specifically he announced that during the first quarter of 2024, which includes January, February, and March, we had a primary fiscal surplus of 0.2% of GDP. That's really great. That's great news because, as you mentioned, for more than 10 years, the country was never had the ability to have positive financial surpluses. And that's the rule number one of any person, right? If you spend more than what you earn, you will be in problems. You will go, companies go into bankrupt, right? They can file Chapter 11, but countries do not. Countries, they keep surviving, right? Because they have a culture, they have existence. But the problem is that, of course, they start lowering their confidence, they start not having credits, and that's what happened in Argentina. It's currently rated triple C. It's very expensive. If the IMF or any investor wants to give money to Argentina, they will ask lots of interest rates, of yields, because they have a solid history of defaulting as well, which is, of course, something really bad for our history. The good thing is that now there is some kind of optimism because it's the first time the country has been able to generate surpluses. This was caused, of course, by making shocking policies, right? For example, most of the impact is being faced by the population. One thing that we did not discuss before, but Argentina has 50% poverty rates. That's so bad, right, for the country. 40% are poor, 10% are indigent, and inflation is the most important tool that makes people more poor, right? Yep. Because the poor are the ones who suffer it more, right? Their salaries are very low. In Argentina, for example, a minimum salary is $200 per month. An average salary is something around $600 per month. They're super low. And I think the thing is that Milei was able to start dismantling the Argentinian state, starting reducing the public expenses, together with some shocking policies in terms of monetary tools, right, that he has been doing.
So what's it like then culturally? Because I like your analogy that the deficit's kind of like personal finance. I've seen it compared to like a heroin addict almost, that like you kind of have to take your medicine and you get off the drugs, but it's really rough at first, right? And Argentina seems to be in that period. So is there still support like from Milei's voters? Do people in Argentina understand that this kind of had to happen if you wanted to get on a better path, or are people frustrated and losing faith in the project already? Because there's been a lot of pain.
Lots of pain. The majority of the population is not being able to get to the end of the month, right? There is huge inflation, right? Inflation, for example, the good thing is in March, inflation was 11%. It went down from 25 in December to 11. And in April, you expect to be just one digit. This is good. But of course, it's a warning because having 11% inflation rates in 1 month is crazy. If you annualize that and you compound it in one, for example, in 2024, inflation is going to be like 180% per year. It's crazy as well, right? So we are on a good path of decreasing, but we are still have to be aware that lots of things should happen together in the meantime, so as to be a developed country and to get into that path. But the good thing is that I believe that people is still has lots of faith still in the project, which didn't used to happen before, right? In the prior governments, people were more like urgent, right? Trying to get quick measures. Now they know that it has to take time, that it's a long path to get on the field again, to be, say, a stable country, a more normal country after several and lots of years of poverty, underdevelopment, unfortunately, of our country. But it's a long way. People, the good thing is that they are still faithful and they believe and they are willing to support these difficult moments, at least for now. We will see how much it could be, right? But hopefully we can leave the government to do what they are planning to do, right?
I mean, you mentioned that it reached a point coming into Milei's election where things were about to explode. So was it that bad before? I mean, the end of 2023, was Argentina's economy really that bad that people are willing to accept what's going on now? I mean, is it bad no matter what, so they at least willing to try something different?
It was crazy. Any person that would be rational, any external investor looked at Argentina's number and they couldn't understand. For example, we had 15 exchange rates. They were all fake, right? And we had the official rate that was the one where you can import and export that was around $400, 400 pesos for $1. And the unofficial rate, the blue one, as we call it, or the parallel market, that was roughly $900, so more than twice between the official and the unofficial rates. Inflation was very high. This 25% was a consequence of what was the inflation as of the last part of the year, right? Of course, I don't do politics. I'm just expressing my opinions here. But I think, of course, that we needed this change, right? We needed a crazy person like Milei to appear and to bring all this new stuff, because if not, we were going just into failure, right? It was going to be even more poverty, more inflation, more defaults, and the history tends to repeat, right? Because this happened many times. So we all have faith, and hopefully we can get better. Not only Argentina, right? Brazil and all the Latin American countries.
Yeah, well,
I feel like there is huge potential.
A strong Argentina economy helps everybody, right? I mean, they're huge trading partners with Brazil. And so to have Argentina like this is not good for anybody in the region, right? To have a strong Argentina with a healthy economy benefits everybody, because it's a highly educated population, right? Like huge natural resources, like you mentioned. So to have 60 million Argentinians that are strongly participating in the economy is clearly a benefit to everybody around here. But you mentioned the peso, right? So what do you think happens with the peso? Because again, another thing that would shock foreigners, right? The first time I was in Argentina was 2015 or 2016, and the exchange rate was about 15 or 16 to 1 with the dollar. And like you mentioned, at the end of 2023, we reached almost 1,000. So can the peso be saved? Do you think Argentina dollarizes like Milei has talked about?
Well, that's an interesting question, because at the moment we are having like a complex situation in terms of the peso, right? Well, of course, we all know about economy and inflation and devaluation mostly go one by one, right? Or goes one next to the other. Argentina has lots of inflation, and that translates into devaluation of the peso, right? It's like a direct consequence. But over the past month, there is something that is quite surprising, and something that is, as we talk, inflation has been around, I don't know, 15, 18% per month on average, right? But the peso has appreciated. The peso, for example, at the end of December was, I would say, 1.2 thousand per dollar. Now the peso is 1,000. So there has been an appreciation of the peso, but together with with very high inflation in pesos. So people, even though they are more rich in dollar terms, they are more poor, because the real consuming power is lower, because inflation is far more exceeding the appreciation of the peso. So people are consuming less, they are spending less on the markets, they are buying less things, the economy goes down, there's less consumption, less economic activity, and as a consequence, less inflation. That's more or less the logic the government is doing to tame inflation. But of course, I believe that the inflation is a big problem, but the cause of the inflation is, of course, the fiscal deficits that the country has historically had. But with the peso, as you're mentioning, we're experiencing some difficult moments because of this kind of stagnation, I would say, because we have recession, right? But we have inflation. So it's kind of a complex moment for macroeconomy, but people are still have faith on the project. They are still willing to put lots of effort and difficulty to reach to the end of the month with their money. But at the moment, everything is going forward, right? Argentina is starting slowly to take off, right?
Do you think Argentine investors have faith in the peso, or do you think the sophisticated Argentine investors they're still hedging with dollars, gold, Bitcoin like they were before?
Yeah, this is my opinion. I believe investors are still not faithful on the peso. Argentina, there are very interesting statistic. One says that which is the country in the ranking, right, that has the highest amount of dollars in their economy. Of course, the first one is the US, right? The second is Argentina. All the people in Argentina, we think in pesos, in dollars, right? Not in pesos. It's a weak currency. We don't have that confidence. And for example, properties or real estate is valued in dollars. We think about, I don't know, cars in dollars. What's the first investment that people go? They go and they buy dollars, even though dollars is not an investment because, of course, it's a currency that is used to trade. In Argentina, since the peso is so weak and deflates and has lots of inflation, people tend to save in US dollars, not save in equities or bonds because it seems like kind of risky. But yeah, I think investors still do not have too much faith on the pesos. I don't even have it yet. But I think hopefully things start getting, it's a path. It's all about the long term, right? I believe. We can expect that just for 3 or 4 months of a new government, things could change. This would be a long-term game of, I believe, 20, 30 years that Argentina could reach very high levels in the rankings as it used to be, right? But it's a path.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, because I think a lot of investors hear dollarization, they think it's something really radical. But large portions of Argentina's economy is already dollarized, like you mentioned, right? The real estate's already dollarized. They export a lot that's typically dollarized. So it's not really that big of a stretch. Like you said, Argentinians are already thinking in dollars, right? So it's not that big of a change.
Yeah, but I also believe that one thing is, let's say, the daily things, the people that invest in dollars and they save in dollars, the exports, the imports, right? But other thing is the real implementation of a dollarization plan. I'm not a big fan of that. I think that it will be almost impossible, not only because I think there are some studies that said it could be super difficult to really implement a dollarized economy as Panama or Ecuador and completely delete the autonomy of the local currency. I believe that we should have our own currency for sure. And if we are able to keep inflation at low levels and take out the central balance to be a financer of the government and to remain independent and as it should be, right, in any government, it would be a good idea to keep our currency. Dollarization could seem great from a news perspective of booming and people say, we go dollars, right? But it also has some drawbacks and it's something that most of people don't know or are not 100% sure it could be properly implemented in our country. It's like an ideal situation, but we will see what the government could do in these 4 years.
See how it plays out. So there's one more specific kind of situation I want to ask you about before we get into the more specific investment stuff. You're a finance professor at a university in Argentina, right? And one of the most recent headlines, part of this shock therapy that we talked about for the economy that Milei is implementing, is they're doing away with free higher education. And for listeners that don't know, Argentina is very famous for free higher education, not just for citizens. I mean, it was very common for Brazilians. I can't tell you how many Brazilians I've met.
Brazilians
would go to Argentina, get a free college degree, and then the day they graduate, take their free degree and go back to Brazil. And Argentinian taxpayers would pay for that. So that is ending, but there's been huge protests from what I see. So
definitely.
What's going on with higher education in Argentina from your perspective as a professor?
Yeah, no, that's a very important question because this week, specifically on Tuesday, there was a very huge strike of lots of people that went to the squares that they were in favor of public education, right? Because there are some news that say that the government wants to close the public education. Of course, that's not true, right? They are like radical news and fake news that appear and the opposite parties, they try to say it. The truth is that Argentina is, as you said, famous for its very high level of education, right? The education in Argentina is really good. And I can say it because I'm also, as you said, a professor. I work there and I have studied abroad as well. And I know the quality of the professors and the education is super good. Also, as you said, lots of Brazilian people, for example, in Rosario, my city, there are lots of Brazilians that go to study medicine. And as you said, they go to study for 6 or 10 years. They get a very deep and solid formation, and then they leave. So there is this kind of fight, right, at the moment. What is happening is that there are several opinions, right, in these terms. I feel like the public education is very important. Education, even if it's private or public, is super important for the development of any country, right? In Argentina, the thing is that the other side of the coin is that we have 50% poverty. Let's say from 10 people, 5 are poor. So how can you still finance public education and be able to open the doors to foreigners to come to study and then to live? Public education as well is subject also to lots of corruption. For example, I study in private universities, but I also do courses and sometimes I also lecture in some public entities. And sometimes you enter the buildings and they are old. They have the ceilings that they are like humid, lots of people in one room, even seated on the floor. So that means that there is not a proper allocation of the funds, right? There are some people who steal money from their funds that go to universities. There are lots of political parties within the universities that they compete so as to be who will be leading the universities for 3 or 4 years. So what the government is asking is not, they also mentioned that they were not going to close public education. Public education is a priority for the country. What they want are audits. And that's something great, right? Because you have to be accountable for the money that you enter. And if the country, the government wants to reduce the fiscal deficits, they also need to reduce fiscal deficit of the universities, right? If the university is not able to put their funds in an efficient way and benefit the population, of course, that's not efficient, right? So there should be audits, there should be controls. And of course, if some more private education entities come to the country, that's even better. There will be more competition and people could choose if you want to go to the public, which is very high and it's free, high quality and it's free, or you want to go to private ones, which you have to pay, and also they are very good quality. So I believe that competition is good for countries, and Argentina is not going to close public education. It has a huge history of this, and we are worldwide known for this, right? So
is it
that's
more
my opinion.
It's more of a budget negotiation than it is an actual like radical reform. Is that fair?
That's fair. Yeah, that's true. The thing is that there are lots of fake news opinions of people. They kind of complex diffusal of the news, right? So there are different news and opinions, and people say that the education is going to be closed, and that's not true. Public education is going to be there, but there should be more controls, there should be more audits, there should be more efficient allocation of funds, and of course there will be more competition in the field. But yeah, you will see, as you might have seen in the news, thousands of people went to these manifestations, right, to be in favor of public education. I'm also in favor of public education. The thing is that we have to be more efficient with our personal finances, as we said. As a company, if you have a company that you spend more, you bankrupt. As the government needs to show the example. The government cannot spend more than their income. So it's just a start, right? It's just a changing in the philosophy of the people, population.
Right. So let's talk a little more about Impactio Finance then, your firm. So tell me a little more about, what services you provide, who are your typical clients?
Sure. Well, in Impactio Finance, we are a boutique corporate finance company that we offer our services to companies, startups, investment funds from Argentina and different parts of the world. We are mostly focused on the corporate finance field. We offer investment banking, business valuation, mergers, acquisitions, investment projects, financing, financial modeling, all those fields, fractional CFO services. It's really fun. We really love what we do. We are called Impactio because we feel like our impact and our why is to maximize the value of the companies that we serve. And we are very passionate. We are a team of 5 people. We work all together. Yeah, we're really passionate about what we do.
So let me ask you then, I didn't send this question over to you before, but I want to ask you about, valuing a company in an environment like Argentina's, because I worked in M&A early in my career in Brazil. And in 2015, 2016, inflation in Brazil was 15%, give or take. And official numbers were like 5. So there's this huge discrepancy. So we would do the discounted cash flow models, and you would do one with 5% inflation and one with 15% inflation. And then when you would model it out 5 years, the perpetuity value was basically irrelevant. You would come up with something at 5% inflation, the company's worth 100 million. At 15% inflation, it's worth 900 million. So how do you do a valuation or come up with a value in an environment like Argentina's?
Super difficult to make valuations here in Argentina. Of course, it's all about sensitivities and scenarios, as you have just mentioned. Also have in mind that, for example, Argentina has a very high country risk. As measured, for example, by JP Morgan, MB+, the index is now 1.2000, right? It's very high. But in December, it used to be 2,000 points. So that means that, for example, when you do the discount rate, you calculate the WACC, you have to add 20% more for accounting for the risk of the country. Now, fortunately, it's 12, so 8 points less in terms of risk of the country. But that destroys, as you said, any project. Which company is being able to generate returns of 20-something in US dollars in a year? It's definitely impossible. That's why valuations in Argentina were at their lowest levels, at their floor levels over the past years. And when you have to do a DCF, as you said, what I typically do in order to try to eliminate all these things that are very difficult to model. For example, which will be the exchange rate in 5 years? Which exchange rate do you use? We had 15. Which one? Do you go with the official? No, but no one can go. Do you use the parallel one? No, because it's illegal. Which one do you use, right? So, but here what we typically do is we convert everything into US dollars. We do all the forecast of revenues, cost, OPEX, and everything in dollars in real terms. So we keep everything constant. So we try to eliminate all the difficult impacts of inflation, devaluation, and everything. So we do everything in constant terms. But it's fun. It's fun. It's challenging, puts your mind to work very hard. But yeah, I agree that valuations in Argentina were on their lowest level. So that was also an opportunity to buy, for example, bonds, right? Let's go to one example, bonds. There are two bonds. The most famous ones in Argentina are the AL30 and the GD30, which are government bonds, sovereign bonds. They were trading in November of last year at a parity of 30, right? 30 of 100, right? So very low. Now, because of the decrease in the country risk premium, they are trading at 60, roughly 60, 70. So imagine if you have bought bonds last year, you more than doubled your investment in US dollars in 3-4 months. There are lots of opportunities in Argentina. There are lots of sectors, industries, equities to buy. The thing is that you need to understand the market. You need to be here, right? To know what happens. An external investor will never understand the country.
Yeah, I think too, it's important to understand the difficulty and the variability in putting a valuation on Argentinian assets means there's serious mispricings. Even if you do your best model, I mean, chances are you could be wrong, which means you can get serious discounts. If you can find an asset you're comfortable with that's seriously mispriced, like you mentioned, you can double your money in 3 or 4 months if the market doesn't necessarily see it the same way as you.
No, and also most of the companies, they are highly tied to government. And hopefully this government that has just started is able to provide more stable policies, right? More stable legislation so that any company that wants to invest in Argentina, they know the rules, not that the rules are changed every time. For example, over the past 12 years, or even more, I would say 20 years, the rules have been changed weekly or monthly. And one company that was able to import from China, I don't know, some supplies, then those were cut and they could not even import anymore. Or other people or other companies that were able to distribute dividends to abroad, right, to foreign investors, they were not even possible to do that anymore because there was a rule that said you cannot provide dollars out of the country. And that's quite surprising, and that's something that destroys the confidence and the reliability of the system. So hopefully now we are able to get to more stable rules, more things, and in that sense, external investors could start to enter again the country because more investments mean more growth. But still, the path is it's like, I don't know, like a football pitch, right? It starts to being constructed, right? Still, we are not playing the game. We are warming up, I would say.
So have you seen then an increase in interest or actual investments into Argentina? Maybe I'll ask you both domestically. So are Argentinian firms starting to reinvest rather than take dollars or Bitcoin and get the money out of the country? And then are international firms also increasing their interest in Argentina?
Yes, I see that. I would answer this question in two ways, right? First, talking about individual investors, right? Like me. And then let's talk about institutional investors, right?
Sure.
I feel like, individual investors, yes, they're starting to invest the money in the country, right? For example, this week, I also saw some statistics that the month of March was the month with the highest private deposit in US dollars since 2020, right? Really? So it means that people are starting to put their US dollars into the system. This shows more confidence, right, in the system. And this also correlates into the capital markets, right? As we mentioned before, bonds. You invested in bonds in November. Against now, you more than doubled your investment. The Merval is the index that gathers all the Argentinian firms like Bovespa in Brazil or the Nasdaq, right? Merval, for example, since January up to now, let's say year-to-date yield is like 25% in dollars in 3 months. That's great. So if you invested the money, let's say at the beginning of the year, and you take it out now, you get 25% in 3 months. That's impressive. So let's say, I would say that the local investors, individual people, they're starting to have more confidence. Of course, it's a tiny part of the population. Most of the population is suffering a lot, right? So that's important to mention. And from institutional investors, I would say that I personally don't see yet signs of external investors coming to Argentina. It's more about studying the country, seeing how things are developing, and the boom, let's say, expected to happen in roughly 2 or 3 years. If the field is starting to get aligned with more rules, Milei is able to do what he says, because one thing that we didn't mention yet is that he's in a tough situation because he also has minorities in all the chambers, right? In the legislative power, let's say, he doesn't have majority, so all his rules he has to negotiate with unions, with oppositions, and it's quite difficult for him to get his packages of laws approved, right? But well, I think we are on a good path. I'm super bullish on Argentina, but we need time to get again on track. But the good thing is that the engine, the car, or the flight is starting to take off, right? But very slowly, but we are making the foundations of a solid country again, in my opinion.
Sure. So then, are there any specific industries or asset classes that you think are going to do particularly well in Argentina over the next, say, 1 to 2 years, based on, the changes that Milei is making? Is there a specific industry or class of assets that you would be?
Yeah, sure. No, I have faith in several asset classes. For example, mining. Mining, I think, is going to be one of the booming industries in Argentina, especially in the Patagonia, right? In the Patagonia region, which is more in the south, that many of you might have heard because it's beautiful. Any of you should go to visit it in addition to make businesses. Patagonia, there are lots of potential for renewable energies like solar, water. It's a very vast area. Also, we have Vaca Muerta, as we mentioned before. Vaca Muerta is roughly 30,000 square meters of oil and gas reserves. And let's say Vaca Muerta is able to start because also it's very green, right? It's starting. There are not much investments at the moment there. But once Vaca Muerta fully develops, right, and it's able to Argentina to produce oil and gas, become the second or fourth, between the second, third largest producers of these oils. And it's amazing, right? Because also the energy matrix of Argentina could change and it can become an exporter of energy rather than an importer, right? That will provide also lots of US dollars into the country. So mining, also we have lithium in the regions of Catamarca, Salta, right? So mining, I think it's a great asset class or industry that has all the potential to boom, right? Also, I believe real estate and tourism is something that has lots of room for improvement. Real estate, the value per square meter is very low. It's more on the average, lower than the average of the past 20 years. So it's a good opportunity maybe to invest or to make constructions, commercial real estate, shoppings, because nowadays the salaries of Argentinian people are very low. As we said before, it's something between $500, $600 per month. So they could not purchase an apartment, right? There is no credit in Argentina. If a person wants to go to the bank to take a credit to buy a house, it's impossible. There are no credit to people. But if the economy starts to reactivate, if the salaries of the people start to go more to average levels as we see in the world, I don't know, thousands of US dollars, right, per month, that would be great. Then there will be more credit. And more credit means more investments. More investments means more growth. And that's like a circle of positive effects for all the economy. And real estate is definitely one area where there could be interesting opportunities if you purchase now, because they are at very low levels of prices. Yeah.
Sure. So yeah, tourism is really interesting because I definitely notice a lot of interest from, my followers in tourism in Argentina, partly because it's very cheap relative to the rest of the world,
cheap.
But it's amazing too. So what are some of the cities that maybe you think tourism could grow significantly? I know Mendoza is popular with the vineyards. There's Barliosh in the Patagonia, but there any destinations that you would highlight maybe for someone that likes to travel?
Yeah, there are lots. Buenos Aires as a capital city, you go there. And for example, I went there last month and it was full of Brazilian people. You go to La Boca, which is near Boca Juniors Stadium and where people dance tango, and they all speak Portuguese, right? Because, of course, Argentina is cheap. Of course, now, let's say over the past 6 months, Argentina is becoming more expensive, and people that come from abroad have to pay a bit more because the peso has appreciated against the dollar, so it's not that cheap as it used to be. But Argentina is amazing to travel. It's very cheap. And, for example, as you said, Bariloche in the south, in Patagonia, is amazing. Lots of people go there during July, which is our winter season, to do some ski. We have the northwest part of Argentina is amazing as well. We have Salta and Jujuy. On the northeast, we have the waterfalls that we share with Brazil, Iguazu, the Iguazu Falls. Argentina is amazing. And I think that if we are able to exploit the tourism, not only from people from Latin America, for example, Chinese people, they love traveling. Imagine you are able to bring 0.5% of the population of the billion people that live in China. What could
Yeah.
happen to the tourism and the economic development of not only Argentina, all the region, but of course to start bringing tourism from the US, from China, from Europe, which is still very low. We need to have more rules, right? More security, less corruption, more stronger institution. All those things, they contribute to the development of a more stable country and more safer country that people could come, right, and not live. In the
I
past
think,
years, well, I would say last year, Patrick, for example, lots of friends from mine and people I know decided to migrate from Argentina. We were getting on an spiral of poverty, of lower salaries, of having a ceiling on your goals and your development. So lots of people went to Spain, to the US, to the UK to study, to develop, to work there because Argentina was going down and down. So the good thing is that now hopefully we can start getting people coming again, and not only, let's say, Argentinians that went abroad, but also investors that come to our country to invest, because there are lots of opportunity, to be fair. You need
yeah.
to know the country. It's difficult to understand from someone that is not from the country, but there are lots of ways to make money
Yeah,
and
yeah,
easy
yeah.
ways.
I think a
Yeah.
perfect example of that in Latin America is El Salvador, of how tourism can benefit an
Uh-huh.
economy as a whole. I mean, their tourism numbers are insane. I think they went up like 30% per
Yeah.
year for a few years. And now I see real estate investment funds being launched. I see so much interest in investments in El
Yeah.
Salvador. And it starts with tourism, right? Like an international investor
Yeah.
is a lot more likely to invest somewhere if they've been to the place and they feel some kind of connection. They feel like they understand it a little bit.
Sure, definitely. No, most of the people that come to Argentina from abroad, they get in love with the country because you go to Buenos Aires and it's a capital city like New York, like Paris. It's amazing. You go to Patagonia and you feel, hey, Switzerland, right? You can imagine that it's a country with 50% poor people with 3-digit inflation rates. We used to be the first or the second economy at the beginning of the 20th century. Now we are the first or the second country with the highest inflation in the world. So things have drastically changed, right? And hopefully we can start to become more stable. We can start to become more reliable, and more people could start having confidence in Argentina. Because as you said, we are a highly literate population. We are good people. We are very intelligent. We are accustomed to crisis. We know how to deal with money and with these kind of things. But of course, we have been making bad decisions that have an impact on confidence, and that definitely translates into devaluation, very high credit rates, lack of credits for the country, lower investments, and lower growth.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're accustomed to dealing with crisis, and that's kind of why I was so surprised that Milei won, and you've seen these changes. Because I kind of just assumed, oh, but that's been Argentina for 20 years, like they're used to it. It is what it is. So I guess gives credence to what you said that really was about to explode at the end of last year.
Yeah, there were some theories that were saying that no more than 3-4 months, if the prior government was reelected, Massa, right, which was part of the same party that was before, from Kirchnerismo, the bomb was going to explode in 3-4 months. Imagine, you cannot live with 25% compounding every month. There is one moment that it explodes, the bomb.
You start to see
And Milei
wheelbarrows of
came
cash.
with exactly. Milei came with one phrase or one quote that he called the chainsaw shock plan, right? The plan motosierra. He came with like the knife, the chainsaw to cut everything, right? And he started to decrease the number of people in the public states. He also wants maybe to make a privatization of some public entities like YPF, which is the public oil manufacturer of Argentina, Aerolíneas Argentinas, which is the airline of the country, Correo Argentino, which is for cards and sending correspondences. So he came with that view to try to reduce drastically and in a shocking way the public expenditures. And I think it's starting to take shape. Of course, it's super difficult times. People are still optimistic about this, but there are lots of people who are suffering a lot. And that's something that it's worth mentioning, because most of the effort of this policy is being done by the poor people, which is 50% of the country. So they are doing a very tough work to try to move forward, to live with very few money, right, to eat, right? And they are the ones who are suffering more. But hopefully things are starting to change, and hopefully we become a developed nation again.
Yeah. So I want to go back to mining really quick. And I don't know how closely you follow the mining news in Argentina. So I'm actually asking because I'm curious. But I highlighted it too, because like you mentioned, the trend that Milei is cutting bureaucracy, cutting spending. And globally, it's really hard to build a mine. I think the average time
Yeah.
for a precious metal mine from discovery to first pour, which is like where it's actually in production, is 16 years. So there's all
Yeah.
these globally. So even in Canada, the tier one jurisdictions, they call it,
Yeah.
it takes forever. So if he can come in and actually, cut the red tape and make it easy to mine in Argentina, like you mentioned, huge reserves of oil, gas, copper, lithium, very well
Yeah.
endowed. So is there anything, have you heard any news? Are there actual concrete plans to make it easier to mine in Argentina?
Yes, yes, yes. For example, during the prior, let's say, right-hand sided government of Macri, there was a concrete plan related to Vaca Muerta of investments and credit and those things. Unfortunately, the government didn't go as well as expected. Macri didn't took all the measures that were needed. He wanted to be more populist and work towards the people to be happy rather than to be drastic in the measures and to change the routes drastically. So the investments that he promised or that all the people imagined they were coming, they didn't come. But yeah, there are specific plans to develop Vaca Muerta. As you said, it takes lots of time, but it is said that typically, let's say, Vaca Muerta on average is expected to be operating with the proper investments in something between 3 to 4 years. So that would be something super important. If investments start to come and they start developing that specific project, it would be massive, the impact of Argentina. But of course, mining by itself is not going to change the position or the macroeconomic position of Argentina. Right, it's going to, of course, to be of great importance. But if you don't change the real origins of the problems, which is the fiscal deficit and the inflation, then that's just going to be a remedy. So if you're able to decrease your expenditures, increase your income, generate positive surpluses, like for example, now Argentina has twin surpluses the past month.
Yeah.
That's really good. Like China used to have some years ago, had a positive fiscal account and a positive commercial account. That was great. Let's see how long it lasts, right? But if the country is able to generate surpluses in fiscal accounts and also start exporting lots of mining, as you said, copper, lithium, oil, gas, everything, and renewable energy as well, it could be a massive turnaround in Argentina's economy. But we need first to make a solution to the structural problems of the country, which are the weak institutions, inflation, corruption.
So I think the other thing that's kind of misunderstood about mining too is it brings a lot of high quality jobs, like educated jobs. Those are engineering projects, right? Like you need petroleum engineers and you need mining engineers. So it's not, digging with shovels. There's some of that, right? There's labor, like there's uneducated labor at a mine, but there's also high quality engineering jobs. So really interesting.
Definitely. Yeah.
So is there anything else we didn't cover about Argentina you think we should talk about before we wrap up?
No, I think, as I mentioned, I'm super bullish in Argentina. I really recommend your listeners to start studying a bit more about the country. I believe we have solid roots to continue developing and to get into a good position. Of course, we are still far away from the situation which is our goal, but the plane is starting to take off. I think it's very important to, as we said, to understand the country, the culture, the inflation. We are full of unions. There is lots of more populist measures from the government, and they like to receive free money. So we are a very complex country, right? More like LATAM countries, right? But we are very special. So if you are an investor and you want to come, it's important for you to study a bit more, to come to the country, to feel it, to see how it works, because there are really super interesting purchasing opportunities. You can make lots of money, of course, if the things develop as planned, right? If not, it could be a risky investment. Everything. If you want to face more risk and invest at lower price, you need to be aware that returns could be higher as well, right? But yeah, there are lots of opportunities. So I really recommend at least studying and looking at the market because it could be booming in the next years.
Yeah, I love the optimism. I think for the first time, at least as long as I've been covering Latin America, there's a reason to be genuinely optimistic about Argentina. Right? And like you said, if it plays out, it has to play out, obviously. Right, it's very early, but there's reason to be excited. So I hope you're right.
Yeah.
And we'll follow up. We'll have to check back in a few months towards the end of the year, maybe, and we'll see what's going on and how it's played out. But for now, give listeners a sign off. Where can they find you? Learn more about your company, follow your work.
Sure. Yeah, we can connect on LinkedIn. You can find me. I also have my Twitter account where I post things about finance, economy, and markets. So I'm willing to connect with all of you guys. It will be a pleasure to discuss anything, and if I could be of any help for you to bring in Argentina investments into Argentina or any advice from my experience and knowledge, I'm completely open. I will be glad to do it.
Great. And I will link all that in the show notes for anyone listening so you can find his pages easily. Thanks so much for doing this, Federico. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Patrick. It was a pleasure as well.